So I want you to try a little thought experiment with me to kick things off.
Oh, okay. I'm ready.
If you were, like, handed a blank check right now and tasked with building the world's most prestigious, revolutionary educational system from scratch, consider where you would start.
Right, like where do you even begin? I mean, most people naturally picture an elite academy, I think.
Yeah,
So you
exactly.
imagine these rolling green hills, a highly curated student body, and, the most cutting edge, expensive technology money can buy. You essentially build a palace of learning.
Right, a total palace. But the stark historical reality is that the Montessori method, which is an educational framework so sought after today that families literally relocate to different school districts just to access it.
Oh, yeah. People buy houses based on those zoning maps.
It's wild.
Yeah.
But it did not begin in a palace. It didn't begin at an Ivy League university or like an elite prep school.
No, it really didn't.
It began in a late 19th century mental asylum. With children, the medical establishment had entirely written off as unteachable.
Which remains, honestly, one of the most striking historical contrasts in the history of education.
It's unbelievable.
The foundation of a system designed to unlock, like, ultimate human potential was laid in a facility designed to warehouse those deemed to have no potential at all.
And that exact journey from an asylum floor to a global educational paradigm is what we are exploring in today's deep dive.
It's such a fascinating shift.
We're looking closely at Chapter 2, which is titled History of Methods, from Maria Montessori's foundational book, The Discovery of the Child.
A phenomenal text.
Our mission today is to unpack how a young doctor transformed her clinical observations in this bleak room into a sensory-based teaching approach that fundamentally altered our understanding of human intelligence.
Right.
And we'll also examine how you can apply these exact same principles in your own home today to support the learners in your life.
Because the insights she documented in that text are just as critical for a toddler exploring your living room right now as they were over a century ago.
Absolutely.
But to really understand the magnitude of this shift, we have to look at the dominant medical mindset of the 1890s.
Set the scene for us a bit.
So at this time, Maria Montessori is one of the very first female physicians in Italy, and her work takes her deep into the psychiatric wards of Rome.
And this included the institutions housing children diagnosed with severe developmental delays, right? Or intellectual disabilities.
Exactly. Children who, in the terminology of that era, were labeled mentally defective.
It was just a brutal label.
It is. And the medical establishment viewed these cognitive delays as fixed physiological deficits. Like, you were broken and therefore you were simply managed.
There's no concept of rehabilitation or education for them.
None. They were warehoused. And the grim reality of these asylum rooms is detailed in the text, and it's essential to visualize it.
Right.
These children were locked in completely empty, cell-like rooms. I mean, bare walls, bare floors, absolutely no toys, no educational materials, no pictures to look at. They were kept alive, they were fed and sheltered, but they were subjected to an absolute vacuum of sensory stimulation.
They were entirely abandoned intellectually. And that environment, as bleak as it is, sets the stage for a pivotal moment in the source material.
The breadcrumbs.
Yes, the observation of the breadcrumbs. Because after mealtime, a behavioral pattern emerged that completely changed the trajectory of Montessori's life.
So the asylum guards frequently observed that after the children finished eating, they would throw themselves down onto the bare floor and frantically gather up any leftover crumbs of bread that had fallen.
And the guards' perspective on this is incredibly telling of the overarching mindset of the time, isn't it?
It really is. They looked at this behavior with sheer disgust. They viewed it as proof of the children's base animalistic nature.
Like, look at these greedy animals.
Exactly. They thought, look at them. They just ate a full meal and they still want more food.
But Montessori, applying a clinical, observational lens to the exact same behavior, noticed a crucial detail that the guards just completely missed.
Right.
The children weren't actually eating the crumbs.
No, she saw that they were merely holding them, manipulating them, rolling them between their fingers.
Wow.
They weren't hungry for food at all. They were suffering from what she termed sensory hunger.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because it's essentially a 19th century sensory deprivation tank.
That's a great way to think about it.
We know that without input, like sight, sound, touch, an adult human brain starts hallucinating or shutting down. It desperately searches for a signal to process.
Right. The brain needs data.
So these kids, locked in a sterile void, were grabbing tiny crumbs of bread just to feel something. just to keep their minds from starving in a vacuum.
Exactly. She recognized that closing off the senses is effectively closing the pathway to the mind itself.
It's the only way in.
The human brain requires constant tactile and sensory input to map its environment and build neural pathways. If you starve the senses, the mind deteriorates.
So what the rest of the medical world had diagnosed as an inherent untreatable mental deficiency was. Right.
It was, in many cases, severe sensory starvation.
That is profound. Their minds weren't fundamentally broken. They were just locked in a dark room with no mechanism to connect to the outside world.
And this realization forces a massive pivot for her.
But
Because if the environment is the disease, then traditional medicine cannot be the cure.
right, because standard medical treatments of the 1890s, tonics, pills, physical therapies, they can't fix an empty room. They can't fix a vacuum of experience.
And that is the core revelation of this chapter. She comes to the profound conclusion that the problem of these children was not medical, but educational.
Okay.
You cannot medicate a lack of interaction with the world. They required what she called a pedagogical treatment.
A pedagogical treatment,
That-
meaning she had to teach them how to interact again.
Exactly. They needed a ladder to climb out of the darkness, and she basically had to invent it from scratch.
And she builds that ladder by focusing almost entirely on the hands, doesn't she?
She does.
She starts designing physical tools to intentionally feed that sensory hunger.
Because she recognized that the hands were the primary interface with the physical world.
Right.
So she created tools that required manipulation, geometric wooden shapes that they could hold, trace, and fit into matching sockets.
Which are still staples in classrooms today.
Oh, everywhere. And most famously, she developed letters of the alphabet cut out of rough, textured sandpaper and glued them onto smooth wooden boards.
The mechanism there is just fascinating to me. Because instead of a child just passively looking at a two-dimensional letter A drawn on a chalkboard, they are physically tracing the shape of the A with their fingertips.
The contrast is key there. The rough sand against the smooth wood isolates the tactile sense.
Oh, I see.
As the child's fingers trace the letter, the muscular movement sends a direct physical memory to the brain, integrating with the visual recognition of the shape.
So it's firing on multiple cylinders.
Exactly. This builds a much stronger, more complex neural pathway than just visual input alone.
And this brings us to a concept she calls the intelligence of the hand.
Yes.
She posits that the hand is the actual instrument of human intelligence. Like, the development of the human mind is inextricably linked to the movement and tactile engagement of our hands.
It completely reframes how learning happens.
We don't just learn by listening or observing. Our cognition is built by grasping the physical world.
Right. Cognition isn't just something that occurs behind the eyes. It extends all the way down to the fingertips.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
And when she introduced these tactile, sensory-rich tools to the children in the asylum, the results documented in the text were viewed by her contemporaries as a literal miracle.
Because once their hands were put to work, once they were finally given a sensory meal, so to speak, their intellect woke up. Children who had been condemned to intellectual death learned to read and write.
And it went beyond just basic literacy. These marginalized children actually took the standardized primary school certificate exams alongside the normal public school children.
Wait, really? The state exams?
Yes.
And they passed. Kids from an empty asylum room passed the state educational exams.
It's incredible.
Thinking about the word cure that the medical establishment likely used to describe this, it feels like the wrong framework entirely.
How so?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. It's like trying to run software diagnostics on a computer because nothing is typing on the screen.
Oh, I like this analogy.
You can rewrite the code all day, but nothing happens until someone looks behind the desk and realizes, oh, the keyboard is simply unplugged.
That is exactly it. The hardware was perfectly capable of processing information. The data stream was simply severed. Montessori didn't rewrite their internal software. By engaging their hands with those sandpaper letters and geometric blocks, she simply plugged the sensory inputs back into the brain. She reestablished the data stream.
So given that she pulled this off, proving the entire medical establishment wrong and getting marginalized kids to pass DEET exams, you would assume she considered this the absolute pinnacle of her career.
You would think so.
But the text reveals that she actually wasn't celebrating.
No, she was terrified.
Which is wild. Why was she terrified?
Because she immediately started looking at the traditional public school system sideways.
Ah.
She asked herself this deeply provocative question. If my sensory methods can elevate these delayed children from a barren asylum to the exact same academic level as normal children,
Right.
what on earth are traditional schools doing to the normal children?
Wow, that is a deeply uncomfortable thought.
It really is.
It suggests that what society considered a normal baseline for intelligence had actually been artificially suppressed.
It's a devastating indictment of the traditional educational model. The logic is just inescapable.
Yeah.
If a child with severe developmental hurdles can catch up to a typical student simply by tracing wooden letters and engaging their hands, then the typical student is actively being held back by their environment.
You have to look at the traditional 19th century classroom to see how. And, frankly, arguably many classrooms today still echo this.
Sadly, yes.
It's a model built on passive obedience. Children are forced to sit perfectly still at rigid, often bolted-down desks.
Desks they can't even move.
Right. They are told to fold their hands, keep quiet, and passively absorb information transmitted verbally by a teacher.
And Montessori realized that this traditional environment was systematically delaying the natural intelligence of typical children.
By demanding stillness.
By demanding stillness and restricting tactile engagement, traditional schools were actually inducing a milder form of the exact same sensory starvation she witnessed in the asylum.
That is staggering.
They were capping a child's potential at an artificially low level, a level an asylum child could reach, just by being allowed to touch physical objects.
And that realization triggers a complete professional upheaval for her, doesn't it?
Right.
She doesn't just write a nice paper about this and collect an award.
Yeah.
She abandons her entire trajectory.
She walks away from her medical career.
Just leaves it.
Leaves it entirely. She leaves her prestigious university chairs. She steps entirely outside the medical and traditional educational establishments and heads to San Lorenzo,
Which was a very poor area, right?
one of the most destitute, impoverished neighborhoods in Rome at the time.
And that is where she opens the very first Casa dei Bambini, the children's house.
Yes.
She shifts her mission from treating deficits to liberating the human mind. She literally sets out to rescue normal children from the stifling grip of traditional education.
Because she understood that if she could build an environment for typical children that fed their sensory hunger rather than restricting it, an environment where movement and touch were the primary engines of learning their intellectual growth would explode far beyond the restrictive benchmarks of traditional schooling.
So what does this all mean for how we view traditional classrooms today? Is Montessori basically saying that a standard classroom without sensory tools is just a slightly prettier version of that empty asylum room?
Divas? Yes. Even today, a room might have bright posters and colorful rubs, but if the underlying mandate is sit still, don't fidget, don't touch, just listen, it functions as a prettier version of that empty room.
Because restricting a child's hands inherently restricts their cognitive potential.
Exactly. Denying the hand its work is denying the mind its growth. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of human development to treat a child as a passive vessel waiting to be filled with verbal information.
They aren't empty buckets.
Right. They are active explorers who require physical interaction to map their understanding of reality.
Which brings us perfectly to the practical application of this text for you, the listener.
Yes, let's bring it home.
Because not everyone listening is designing public school curriculums, but many of us interact with kids every day as parents, caregivers, aunts, uncles.
Sure.
How do we apply a century-old revelation from a Roman psychiatric ward to a modern living room? How do we prevent this sensory hunger in our own homes today?
The book offers a brilliant metaphor to guide caregivers here. Montessori describes a child's hand as the antenna that picks up their intelligence.
Oh, I love that. The antenna.
Think about how a physical antenna actively searches the airwaves for a signal. A child's hand is constantly searching the physical environment, gathering sensory data to send back to the brain to build cognition.
That changes everything about how you observe a toddler's behavior.
It really reframes it.
When you see a kid obsessed with plunging their hands into the mud, or a child who absolutely insists on grabbing your car keys, the television remote, or, I don't know, the whisk out of the kitchen drawer.
Oh yeah, always the whisk.
Always. The standard adult reaction is to see that as an annoyance. We view it as them being messy or difficult.
But viewed through Montessori's clinical lens, they aren't trying to be difficult. Their antennas are up.
Right.
They are actively seeking the exact sensory data their brains desperately need to map the physical world. The weight of the metal keys, the temperature of the mud, the interlocking wires of the whisk, that is pure data collection.
Recognizing that makes our typical adult reactions seem incredibly counterproductive.
The source material actually contains a very stern warning about this dynamic,
What does she say?
constantly telling a child, take your hands away, don't touch that, or keep your hands to yourself, is actively harmful to their cognitive development.
You're effectively blinding them to the physical world.
Yes. By constantly forbidding touch, we inadvertently recreate the sensory deprivation of the asylum right in our own homes.
Wow.
You are severing the data stream. You are transforming a naturally curious explorer into a knowledge-starved individual.
That is heavy.
When we demand that a child navigate a room purely with their eyes and ears, keeping their hands in their pockets, we are starving their primary engine of intelligence.
We really have to challenge ourselves on this. It requires confronting our own priorities. Like, how often do we prioritize having a perfectly clean living room or a quiet, uninterrupted car ride over providing a child with a sensory meal?
It's tough because the adult instinct for order, cleanliness, and convenience is powerful and understandable.
Oh, it is entirely understandable. Cleaning up a mud puddle in the kitchen or picking up scattered household objects is exhausting.
It is.
But if we internalize this text, we have to reframe that mess. The dirt, the water splashing out of the sink, the endless fascination with everyday household tools that isn't a mess to be managed. That is the essential neurological food their brain requires to grow.
Exactly. We have an obligation to provide an environment where touching the world is not just permitted, but intentionally encouraged, where their hands have purposeful, engaging work to do every single day.
Looking back at the arc of this deep dive, the scale of this paradigm shift is just immense.
It really is.
We started by observing lost children gathering breadcrumbs off a bare floor, and from that single clinical observation, we uncovered the reality that human intelligence is unlocked through the hands.
Right.
It shifts our entire framework from trying to fix perceived deficits to actively unlocking boundless potential by simply plugging the inputs back in.
It fundamentally upends our assumptions about traditional schooling and everyday play.
Completely.
But, the implications of sensory hunger don't just stop at childhood development.
Brilliant.
Consider the trajectory of our own lives. We've spent this time discussing how critical physical touch and sensory input are for a developing mind and how starving those senses causes the mind to deteriorate.
Right.
What happens to us as adults when we stop touching the physical world?
Oh, wow. That is a fascinating extension of the premise.
I mean, we live in an era where we spend the majority of our waking hours tapping flat, featureless glass screens, typing on uniform plastic keyboards, and existing inside purely visual virtual spaces.
That's entirely true.
If the hand is the instrument of human intelligence, are we too suffering from a modern adult version of sensory hunger?
Are our own antennas down?
Exactly.
That is a brilliant and unsettling question to chew on.
Yeah, it's something to think about.
Well, thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the discovery of the child. As you navigate your day, remember that the ultimate environment for learning doesn't require an elite academy or a billion-dollar endowment.
Not at all.
It simply requires an environment that allows you to engage physically with the reality around you. So go out, touch the world, and keep your antennas up. We'll see you next time.